On September 12, 2020, a rescue boat arriving at a remote shore in the Shantar Islands found a scene that defied every rule of wilderness safety. A family of 5 had done everything right. They kept a pristine camp and secured their food 100 feet away. Yet, they were all gone. What investigators discovered was not a defensive encounter, but a rare, premeditated predatory hunt by a 900-pound bear that didn't want their food. It wanted them. A dense coastal mist covered the archipelago. Visibility was measured at less than 50 feet. The damp air muffled the sound of the tide against the shoreline. This environmental bottleneck neutralized the human senses of sight and hearing. Viktor Belov, age 48, was a seasonal fisherman. He had lived in a small cabin near the tree line for 10 years. He was the primary witness to the event. 2 days prior, a family of 5 had arrived by boat. The group included 39-year-old Andrei Sokolov, his wife, and 3 children. They pitched a green canvas tent 150 feet inland from the shore. The family maintained a clean campsite. All food attractants were stored in sealed containers 100 feet away from the sleeping area. At 6:15 a.m., Victor walked toward his tide nets. The grass was wet. The temperature was 45 degrees Fahrenheit. He observed a male brown bear emerging from the spruce forest. The animal weighed approximately 900 pounds. Its coat was matted and its hip bones were visible. This indicated a severe caloric deficit. Victor stopped moving. He lowered his body behind a large piece of driftwood. His breathing became shallow. The bear did not move toward the food storage area. It focused its attention on the green canvas tent. The animal moved in silence across the damp moss. It kept its head low to the ground. The bear was within 20 feet of the shelter. It surged forward suddenly. The animal threw its full weight against the tent. The fabric tore immediately. The family was inside their sleeping bags. Andrei Sokolov attempted to sit up. The bear delivered a heavy blow to his upper torso. The sound of fracturing ribs was audible from the shoreline. Andrei was thrown several feet from the center of the camp. He remained motionless on the ground. Elena Sokolov moved toward the children. The bear struck her across the head and neck. The force of the impact drove her skull against a rock. All vocalizations from the woman ceased. The eldest child, age 10, exited through a tear in the rear of the tent. He attempted to run toward the tree line. His bare feet struggled for traction on the wet grass. The bear turned away from the tent. It intercepted the boy within 3 strides. The animal clamped its jaws onto the boy's torso. It shook the subject violently. The bear dropped the boy and returned to the wreckage of the tent. The 2 younger children remained trapped in the collapsed canvas. Victor watched from behind the driftwood. His hands were clamped shut. He could not move his legs. The bear lunged into the center of the debris. Movement inside the camp stopped within 3 minutes. The bear stood over the site for several minutes. Its sides heaved. The animal's snout was heavily stained. It turned its head toward the woods. It sniffed the damp air. The bear then walked back into the spruce forest. The animal vanished into the mist. Victor waited 20 minutes before attempting to stand. He approached the site with a radio in his hand. The scent of copper was heavy in the clearing. Victor confirmed that all 5 family members were deceased. They had sustained fatal trauma to the head, neck, and torso. Victor contacted the authorities at 6:45 a.m. He waited on the shore until a rescue boat arrived 4 hours later. Medical findings and aftermath. Medical examiners determined that all 5 subjects died of massive blunt force trauma and sharp force injuries. Andrei Sokolov suffered a crushed rib cage and a fractured cervical spine. Elena Sokolov died from a catastrophic skull fracture. The 3 children sustained fatal injuries to the neck and abdominal cavity. In all cases, death occurred within minutes of the initial contact. Viktor Belov was treated for acute shock and temporary loss of motor function in his lower extremities. He was found pale and unresponsive by the rescue crew. His physical condition stabilized within 48 hours, but he declined to return to the Shantar Islands for the following fishing season. The subsequent investigation by wildlife officials confirmed the bear had not been provoked. No food or trash was located inside the tent. The bear had deliberately bypassed the secured food stores to target the inhabitants of the tent. This established the event as a rare, premeditated predatory attack by a malnourished animal. Incident analysis. Predatory intent. The bear's behavior, total silence, direct approach, and ignoring secondary food sources, confirms this was a predatory hunt rather than a defensive encounter. Environmental masking. The heavy morning mist and damp ground neutralized human senses, allowing a 900-pound predator to reach the camp undetected. Shelter vulnerability. Soft-sided canvas tents provide zero physical protection against a large predator. In high-risk territories, they offer only a visual barrier that can be easily breached. Lean year dynamics. The bear's poor physical condition and visible bones suggest a lack of natural food sources, which often leads to increased aggression toward non-traditional prey. Survival paradox. Despite following all standard protocols for food storage and camp cleanliness, the family was targeted because the predator was not seeking food scraps, but the occupants themselves. Practical takeaway. When camping in high-density grizzly territory during lean years, a portable electric fence is the only reliable way to prevent a nighttime or low-visibility predatory approach. If a 600-pound grizzly bear charged your vehicle at full speed, would you know whether to swerve or stay the course? For Robert Miller, a split-second decision to steer his 34-foot luxury RV away from a charging bear resulted in a catastrophic rollover that trapped his entire family inside the wreckage. As the bear began raking the metal skin of the overturned vehicle, the family realized that their expensive, hard-sided sanctuary was the only thing keeping the predator at bay. The environment was characterized by dense pine stands and a narrow, winding asphalt road. The air temperature was 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The primary environmental bottleneck was the topographical constraint of the road, which was flanked by thick vegetation and steep inclines. This reduced the driver's field of vision and eliminated a secondary path for evasive maneuvering. Robert Miller, age 46, was operating a 34-foot luxury Class A recreational vehicle. His wife and 2 children were passengers in the main cabin. The vehicle was traveling uphill at approximately 35 miles per hour. The interior climate control was active, reducing external auditory input. At 11:20 a.m., a grizzly bear emerged from the brush on the right side of the vehicle. The animal was less than 10 feet from the RV when it began a lateral charge. The bear's mouth was open, and its fur was upright. Miller applied the brakes and steered the steering wheel sharply to the left. The maneuver caused a rapid shift in the vehicle's center of gravity. The tires lost traction on the asphalt. The RV tipped onto its passenger side. It slid 15 feet across the road before stopping. Inside the cabin, loose equipment and glass shards moved at high velocity. The family members were thrown against the interior walls. The scent of spilled fuel and aerosolized dust became prominent. The grizzly bear did not retreat after the impact. It approached the overturned vehicle. The clicking of claws on the asphalt was audible to the occupants inside. The bear circled the RV. It used its front claws to rake the metal skin of the vehicle. The sound of tearing paint and scored metal echoed through the cabin. The animal pressed its weight against the side of the RV. The frame creaked under the pressure. The bear's nostrils flared as if inspected the seams of the doors and windows. Inside, the family remained silent and motionless. Their breathing was shallow. The children exhibited wide eyes and tremors in their hands. At 11:35 a.m., sirens from emergency vehicles were audible from the south. The bear turned its head toward the sound. It maintained its position near the RV until wildlife officers arrived at the scene. Officers deployed two types of deterrents. They used birdshot crackers to create loud, sharp reports. They also deployed high-concentration capsaicin spray. The bear grunted and reared onto its hind legs. It then turned and moved into the dense timber at a steady pace. The sound of breaking branches continued for several minutes as the animal moved away. Rescue crews used the skyward-facing driver's side door to extract the family. The occupants climbed out onto the exterior of the tipped vehicle. They then descended to the road surface. Medical findings and aftermath. Medical personnel evaluated all 4 family members at the scene. Robert Miller sustained a deep hematoma on his left shoulder and minor lacerations to his hands. His wife was treated for a strained rotator cuff and multiple abrasions. Both children sustained superficial lacerations on their arms and faces caused by flying glass shards and unsecured cabinetry. The family was transported to a regional medical center for diagnostic imaging. No internal hemorrhaging or bone fractures were detected. They were treated for moderate shock and released within 6 hours of arrival. The $300,000 recreational vehicle was declared a total loss due to structural frame twisting and extensive exterior damage from the predator. The family reported recurring sleep disturbances and a heightened sensitivity to sudden movements in their peripheral vision. Robert Miller ceased long-distance backcountry driving and sold his remaining outdoor equipment.
Incident analysis. Vehicle dynamics. The high center of gravity in the RV made a sharp, evasive maneuver at 35 miles per hour a critical failure point, leading to the rollover. Predatory persistence. The bear did not flee after the mechanical noise of the crash. Instead, it investigated the wreck as a potential food source or territorial intruder. Containment success. The hard-sided shell of the luxury RV provided a sufficient physical barrier that prevented the Grizzly from reaching the occupants during the 15-minute standoff. Effective deterrence. The combination of auditory, cracker shells, and chemical, bear spray deterrents used by officials was necessary to break the animal's interest in the vehicle. Practical takeaway. When large wildlife enters the roadway, it is statistically safer to apply maximum braking in a straight line rather than attempting a high-speed swerve, especially in top-heavy vehicles like RVs or SUVs. Elena Vance was no amateur. She was a certified wilderness first responder in the middle of a grueling 72-hour solo survival simulation. She was armed with experience and bear spray, but when a grizzly emerged from the Montana brush at a high rate of speed, her gear failed her in the 1 second that mattered. Forced into a desperate play-dead maneuver, Elena had to lie motionless while the predator placed its full weight on her back to test if she was still alive. The environment was characterized by dense timber and steep, rocky inclines. Patches of spring snow remained on the ground. Visibility was limited to 30 feet in the thickest sections of the forest. Elena Vance, age 32, was a certified wilderness first responder. She was 36 hours into a 72-hour solo survival simulation. Her gear consisted of a tarp, a water filter, a small medical kit, and a canister of bear spray. She was moving uphill through a stand of pine trees. The ground was saturated with meltwater. At 10:15 a.m., Vance reached a cluster of large boulders. She observed a single track in a patch of slush. The print measured approximately 11 inches in length. Claw marks were visible. Nearby, she located a pile of fresh scat. Vance noted that the waste was still radiating heat. Vance placed her hand on the bear spray holster at her right hip. The sound of snapping wood originated from the slope above her. A large grizzly bear emerged from the brush at a high rate of speed. The animal moved directly toward her position. Vance attempted to draw her bear spray. The plastic safety clip remained lodged in the holster. She turned to descend the slope. Her right boot lost traction on a patch of loose shale. She fell forward. Her body slid 10 feet down the incline. Her chest impacted a flat rock surface at the base of the slope. The impact resulted in an immediate loss of breath. Her vision became intermittent. Vance lay prone on the rock. She could not move her right arm. The grizzly bear stopped at the top of the slope. It huffed audibly. The animal began a slow descent toward her. Gravel shifted under the bear's weight. It reached Vance within seconds. The bear stood over her. Vance remained motionless. She experienced shallow breathing and a rapid heart rate. The bear lowered its head. The scent of wet fur and decomposition was present. The animal placed its front right paw on the center of Vance's back. The pressure was heavy and sustained. The claws did not penetrate her clothing. The bear maintained this position for several seconds. Vance felt the weight compressing her rib cage. The bear removed its paw. It turned away from Vance. The animal walked back into the timber at a steady pace. It did not vocalize. Within 1 minute, the bear was no longer visible. Vance remained on the ground for several hours. She experienced severe chest pain and restricted mobility. As the temperature dropped at dusk, she crawled to a nearby rock hollow. She used spare clothing to wrap her torso. Her hands were shaking as she attempted to hydrate. The following morning, Vance walked 3 miles to the designated pickup point. She did not report the incident to the instructors. She completed the exercise on schedule. Medical findings and aftermath. Upon returning home, Vance sought medical evaluation for persistent thoracic pain. X-rays confirmed 3 fractured ribs on the right side. She also presented with extensive hematomas across her chest and back, some of which matched the dimensions of a large bear paw. There were no lacerations, puncture wounds, or signs of predatory consumption. Recovery required 8 weeks of restricted physical activity and pain management. The fractures healed without surgical intervention or permanent respiratory impairment. However, Vance experienced a temporary loss of motor strength in her right arm due to blunt force trauma to the shoulder during the fall. Vance eventually transitioned from backcountry fieldwork to a role in wilderness safety education. She suffers from recurring hypervigilance when in forested environments. She has since documented the incident with wildlife biologists to assist in the study of non-aggressive bear-human interactions.
Incident analysis. Equipment failure. The bear spray was inaccessible at the critical moment because the holster clip was stuck, highlighting the need for regular gear testing under stress. Environmental awareness. Vance identified fresh sign, warm scat and tracks, but did not immediately retreat or vocalize to alert the animal of her presence. Physical response. Falling on shale during a retreat attempt increased Vance's vulnerability. Running from a grizzly often triggers a predatory chase instinct. Effective inactivity. By remaining prone and motionless, playing dead, Vance likely signaled to the bear that she was not a threat, preventing a defensive mauling. Animal behavior. The bear's testing with its paw suggests a curiosity or dominance display rather than a predatory attack. Practical takeaway. Ensure bear spray is not only carried, but can be drawn and deployed in under 2 seconds. Practice the physical motion of unholstering frequently. 300 feet below the surface of the Caucasus Mountains lies a narrow limestone system known as the Throat. Here, the air is stagnant, the temperature is a constant 38 degrees, and the only light comes from a single headlamp. For geologist Anton Volkov, the absolute silence of the cave was broken by a sound that shouldn't exist in the deep earth, the low, rhythmic breathing of a hibernating brown bear just 5 feet away. The environment was characterized by high-altitude limestone ridges and dense fog. Deep within the mountain, the temperature remained a constant 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The primary environmental bottleneck was the absolute lack of light and the confined geometry of the cave. Total isolation and a lack of communication equipment removed the possibility of immediate external rescue.
Anton Volkov, age 39, was a professional geologist and experienced caver. He was on the third day of a solo expedition to map a narrow system known as the Throat. He was positioned more than 300 feet below the surface. Volkov moved through a passage where the ceiling height was less than 3 feet. He was equipped with a helmet lamp, climbing gear, and a small supply kit. The air was stagnant. Volkov used white chalk to mark the limestone walls. He moved in a prone position, pulling his body forward with his hands. At 2:40 p.m., Volkov entered a wider chamber. He heard a low, rhythmic exhalation from the darkness ahead. Volkov stopped moving. His heart rate increased and his breathing became shallow. He directed his headlamp toward the rear of the chamber. The light illuminated a large, brown bear curled against the limestone wall. The animal was approximately 5 feet from his position. The bear's breathing was slow but irregular. Volkov began to crawl backward. He attempted to keep his weight centered to avoid noise. His right boot shifted a patch of loose gravel. The bear uncurled its body. It opened its eyes and focused on Volkov. The animal did not vocalize. The bear lunged forward across the chamber floor. Volkov shoved his upper body into a narrow, vertical fissure in the rock wall. The bear struck Volkov's right thigh with its front paw. The claws penetrated the heavy fabric of his trousers and the underlying muscle. Volkov experienced immediate, sharp pain and heat in his leg. The bear pressed its snout toward the fissure and exhaled once. It then retracted and moved back to the far side of the chamber. Volkov remained wedged in the crevice for 6 hours. He experienced uncontrollable shivering and a loss of sensation in his lower right limb. Blood loss continued, saturating his clothing. His headlamp began to fail. Volkov used his hands to apply direct pressure to the wound. At 9 p.m., he began his exit. He crawled on one knee and one elbow. He dragged his right leg across the wet limestone. The pain caused intermittent visual disturbances and near unconsciousness. Volkov reached the surface after 4 hours of climbing. He used only his arms to ascend the final vertical sections. He was unable to walk and dragged his body down the mountain ridge. A shepherd's dog located Volkov at the edge of a lower meadow. He was transported by horse to a local village. A medical helicopter later moved him to a regional hospital. Medical findings and aftermath. Medical evaluation revealed 4 deep lacerations to the right thigh. The claws had caused significant damage to the quadriceps muscle and peripheral nerves. Volkov had lost approximately 2 pints of blood and was treated for stage 2 hypothermia and acute shock. Surgeons performed multiple procedures to debride the wounds and repair the muscle tissue. Volkov remained in the hospital for 3 weeks. He underwent 6 months of physical therapy to regain the use of his right leg. The nerve damage resulted in a permanent loss of sensation in the lower thigh and a visible limp. Volkov ceased all solo caving activities following the incident. He experienced long-term hypervigilance and a clinical avoidance of confined spaces.
Incident analysis. Predatory presence. Brown bears occasionally utilize cave entrances or deep chambers for hibernation, denning, making any unmapped cave a potential site for a defensive encounter. Environmental risk. The confined space of the Throat removed all tactical retreat options, forcing a close-quarters confrontation. Solo expedition. The absence of a partner meant that Volkov had to perform a self-rescue despite severe physical trauma and blood loss. Defensive strike. The bear's behavior, striking once and then retreating, indicates a defensive reaction to a perceived intruder rather than predatory intent. Light discipline. The use of a headlamp directly on the bear likely accelerated the animal's transition from sleep to defensive action. Practical takeaway. When exploring caves in known bear territory, especially in autumn, use sound or scent markers before entering chambers to avoid surprising denning animals in dead-end spaces. In the middle of a roaring Alberta wildfire, Carlos Mendez found himself trapped between a wall of advancing flames and a charging grizzly defending her cubs. He had fallen twice on sharp limestone, his boots catching on roots as the ashen-furred predator closed the gap to within 10 feet.
This is the incredible story of how a simple 120 decibel air horn became the only thing that stood between a seasoned firefighter and a fatal mauling. The environment was characterized by an active forest fire. A thick orange haze covered the region, and the smell of burning pine was pervasive. The primary environmental bottleneck was a combination of low visibility due to smoke and high ambient noise from the advancing fire and nearby machinery. Carlos Mendez, age 36, was a seasonal wildland firefighter with 12 years of experience. He was assigned to a crew cutting a firebreak through dense underbrush. Mendez was working a section of the line approximately 50 feet from his nearest colleague. He carried a Pulaski tool for clearing brush and an air horn clipped to his equipment belt. At 10:45 a.m., the wind shifted, pushing a wall of smoke toward Mendez's position. The sound of the fire was measured at high decibels, masking smaller noises in the forest. Mendez was hunched over, swinging his tool into a cluster of tangled shrubs. Through a break in the smoke, a large female grizzly bear appeared 30 feet away. The bear's coat was covered in ash. 2 cubs were positioned immediately behind her. The bear lowered its head and pinned its ears against its skull. The bear struck the ground with its front paw and accelerated toward Mendez. Mendez dropped his Pulaski tool and turned to his right. He attempted to ascend a steep, rocky embankment to gain elevation. As he moved uphill, Mendez's right boot caught on a submerged root. He fell forward, sliding 3 feet down the slope. His forearms impacted a patch of sharp limestone. The fall resulted in multiple lacerations and skin abrasions. Mendez stood up and continued his ascent. He stumbled a second time on loose soil, falling to one knee. The bear was now within 10 feet of his position. Mendez reached for the air horn on his belt. He turned toward the bear and depressed the trigger. The device emitted a high-frequency 120 decibel blast. The bear halted its forward motion and lifted its head. It remained stationary for several seconds, looking toward the source of the noise. Mendez began to move backward slowly, maintaining visual contact with the animal. The bear huffed once and turned back toward the thicker brush. The cubs followed the adult female as they retreated into the smoke. Mendez stood motionless for 2 minutes. His chest was heaving and his hands exhibited a visible tremor. Mendez eventually returned to his crew and reported the encounter. He resumed his duties on the fire line for the remainder of the shift. Medical findings and aftermath. Medical personnel at the base camp treated Mendez for several deep abrasions on his forearms and right knee. The wounds were cleaned and bandaged to prevent infection from the ash-heavy environment. There were no fractures or internal injuries sustained during the falls on the embankment. Mendez experienced a localized inflammatory response in his joints for 48 hours following the event. He was cleared for full duty after 1 day of rest. No surgical intervention or long-term physical rehabilitation was required. In the months following the encounter, Mendez reported increased levels of fatigue and persistent hand tremors when working in low-visibility smoke. He chose to transfer to an equipment-based fire response role the following year to reduce time spent on foot in high-risk predator corridors. Incident analysis. Environmental masking. The high noise and low visibility of the wildfire prevented Mendez from detecting the bear's approach until it was within a critical distance. Defensive trigger. The presence of cubs and the stress of the approaching fire likely lowered the bear's threshold for a defensive charge. Tool usage. Mendez correctly dropped his heavy Pulaski tool, which allowed for a greater mobility during his attempt to climb the embankment. Effective deterrent. The air horn functioned as a non-lethal sensory disruptor, successfully interrupting the bear's charge without the need for physical contact or bear spray. Post-fall response. Despite falling twice, Mendez maintained focus on his belt-mounted deterrent, rather than attempting to continue a flight response that he could not win. Practical takeaway. In high-noise environments where vocalizations are ineffective, a high-decibel mechanical noisemaker, like an air horn, is a critical tool for disrupting a predator's focus. If you value these true survival stories, please hit that red subscribe button right now. It helps our channel grow so we can keep sharing these vital lessons. Deep in the Siberian Taiga, a broken rear axle on a logging truck turned a routine drive into a nightmare. Stuck on a mud-churned road with no radio and a failing engine, two timber workers found themselves face-to-face with an 800-pound bear guarding a fresh elk kill. When their hunting rifle suffered a mechanical malfunction during a warning shot, the men realized they were no longer the top of the food chain in the Russian Far East. The environment was a narrow, unpaved logging road deep in the Siberian Taiga. The ground was a mixture of churned mud and early ice. The primary environmental bottleneck was a mechanical failure on the subject's vehicle. A broken rear axle reduced their speed and prevented a rapid tactical retreat. Ivan Petrov, age 51, and Grigory Sokolov, age 33, were returning from a timber harvest. They were operating a Ural flatbed truck. The vehicle's radio was non-functional, leaving the men without a means of communication. At 4:30 p.m., the truck's headlights illuminated a large shape in the center of the road. A male brown bear, weighing approximately 800 pounds, was positioned over a bull elk carcass. The bear did not retreat as the truck stopped 30 feet away. The scent of raw meat and internal organs was present in the cold air. Ivan Petrov stopped the engine. He reached behind the seat and retrieved a hunting rifle. Petrov and Sokolov exited the vehicle and stood on the damp gravel. Petrov aimed the rifle into the air to fire a warning shot. He depressed the trigger. The weapon failed to discharge due to a mechanical malfunction. The bear lifted its head and locked its eyes on the two men. It initiated a charge immediately. The distance was covered in less than 3 seconds. Petrov stepped backward and lost his footing on the slick clay. The bear's right paw struck Petrov across the top of his skull. The force of the impact drove Petrov's face into the dirt. Sokolov remained by the truck and retrieved a heavy steel wrench from the flatbed. Sokolov threw the tool at the bear. The wrench struck the animal's ribcage with a blunt thud. The bear transitioned to a bipedal stance. It stood nearly 9 feet tall. The animal did not continue the attack. The bear dropped to all fours and moved back toward the elk carcass. It maintained visual contact with the men. The bear gripped the elk in its jaws and dragged the remains into the forest. Petrov remained on the ground with significant blood loss from his scalp. Sokolov assisted Petrov into the passenger seat of the truck. They drove for 4 hours toward the nearest settlement. The broken axle produced a constant grinding sound throughout the transport. Medical findings and aftermath. Upon reaching a medical facility in Khabarovsk, Petrov was treated for a catastrophic scalp laceration. Surgeons applied 37 sutures to close the wound. Clinical imaging confirmed a minor linear fracture of the skull and significant bruising to the cervical spine. Petrov suffered permanent hearing loss in his left ear due to the blunt force of the paw strike. He remained hospitalized for 12 days. He experienced recurring vertigo and chronic headaches for several months following the event. Psychological evaluation noted signs of hypervigilance and a flat emotional affect. Petrov returned to the timber industry but moved to an administrative role to avoid field work. The physical scar remains visible across the superior aspect of his cranium.
Incident analysis. Mechanical failure. The compromised rear axle limited the subject's ability to stay inside the vehicle and drive around the predator safely. Firearm maintenance. The failure of the warning shot suggests a lack of recent maintenance or a cold weather lubrication issue, rendering the primary deterrent useless. Defensive aggression. The bear was exhibiting resource guarding.
It viewed the men as competitors for the elk carcass rather than prey. Successful deterrent. The impact of the heavy wrench functioned as a physical distractor, breaking the bear's focus on the fallen subject and allowing for a stalemate. Vulnerable posture. Exiting the vehicle in the presence of a bear on a kill is a high-risk tactical error. The truck provided the only reliable physical barrier. Practical takeaway. If a predator is encountered on a carcass, do not exit the vehicle. Use the vehicle's horn or engine noise to encourage the animal to move, or wait for the animal to cache the kill elsewhere.